Today I'm going to talk about Balloons, a poem by Deborah Chandra that's listed in grade 2 of the RCM syllabus. It's on page 26 of the 20th Century Children's Poetry Treasury. This is a poem with a lot of great imagery in it, and I'd like to communicate that to them right from the first lesson. First, I'd read it aloud to them, then I'd read it to them again and ask them to listen to it, pretending to be one of the balloons in the poem. I'd emphasize the movements when I read it to them the second time, holding their breath while they swim dreamily, swaying slightly, bumping and rubbing along the walls. They drift and sleep. And after that initial introduction, I'd give them a copy of the first stanza written on a piece of paper, lots of white space. And I'd ask them to read it aloud, slowly, as if their lungs are inflated balloons, getting their ribs to expand and their lungs full of air. Now, if they have trouble with that, there's a nice breathing exercise you can do. Get them to raise their hand over their head, put one arm on their ribs, and let them feel the sides of their ribs expand, and then to feel the back, just bend forward slightly and to breathe into the back. I'd ask them to speak slowly, as if they are the balloons swimming dreamily. And as they read the stanza, the balloon slowly loses air. I have two goals here. I notice that a lot of young children can speak really fast, especially if they're really good readers. So I want them to slow down and really embody the imagery, to embody the language, to be the balloon. And then I'd ask them, if they haven't mentioned it already, because they might, if they see any rhymes in this stanza. The answer is, of course, no. And then I'd introduce the vocabulary word free verse. When I'm talking to an 8-year-old, I'm probably just going to say, it's a poem that doesn't have any rhymes. No need to get any more technical than that. In the second lesson, I'm going to start with a review of the first stanza, getting them to read it aloud, moving like the balloon. I'd also try what I call a cue to cue game, where I recite part of the line, leaving a little bit out, and they fill in the missing bits, and that encourages them to memorize it. Then I'll give them a copy of the second stanza, printed out on a white piece of paper, lots of white space, and ask them to read it. If I haven't already introduced the term alliteration, now would be a great time, so I'd ask them if they see any alliteration. Swaying slightly, wander the air wisps. Feel fat, back bob. I'd get them to circle all the alliterated words on their paper. And I'd also get them to say the alliterated phrases, encouraging them to exaggerate the sounds. This is also a good time to introduce the vocabulary word assonance. There's the same vowel sounds in nearby words. I'd get them to say fat backs. And while they say this, get them to imagine themselves having a fat back. Again, using that exercise if they need to fill their rib cage with air. And maybe give them a mirror and let them look at the wideness of the short vowel fat backs. In the third lesson, after a review of stanzas 1 and 2 using movement and a cue to cue game, then I'm going to read it and ask them to mime it, and I'll pause at the hyphen, watch to see if they sleep. Hopefully they'll close their eyes. And I'll read the last parts quite slowly, as if they're falling asleep. They may pick up my cues, they may not. Do they pick up my cues, or do they get restless? This would tell me a lot. Because if they don't pick up the cues, I'll give them some instruction here. Pretend that you're a balloon and you're falling asleep, swaying gently. Then again, we do a little bit of analysis. Can they find any alliteration here? How about assonance? The words smooth moons. And give them a mirror and let them watch their mouth. Smooth moons describe the shape of their mouths. And in the fourth lesson and beyond, we'll be working towards a performance. At this point, I'd show them the book and let them read it from the book, or I'd give them a copy of the whole poem on a sheet of paper if they don't have the book. My goal with this poem is to get the student to embody the imagery, to pretend they're a balloon, and to let it affect their vocal choices, how slow they move, and the feeling of weightlessness. All of this is bound to affect their vocal choices, and if it doesn't, then I'd give them a little nudge in that direction. And also, you can play with pace in this poem because there's a progression from the swimming to the sleeping. And that's all I have to say about this little poem. I really like this little poem. I think it's quite delightful, and I hope you found what I have to say useful for your students.